Hello, good morning. Am I audible to all?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good morning, all of you. Welcome to the uh, first session in third day of FDP. We are going to begin with very first session of the day. The presenter of session is Dr. Bhakti Vaishnav ma'am. She is assistant professor in Government Arts and Commerce College, Jaddar. She is having doctorate degree and more than 10 years of teaching experience. So we are having great opportunity to begin the very first session of day with her. So I am directly handing over the session to presenter of the day, Dr. Bhakti Vaishnav ma'am. Please ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to all of you. Um, Let me just give you a brief idea of what we are going to do today. We would have a sort of discussion from or the inputs from my side, and towards the end of it we can have questions, but it would be very interesting and helpful if you could interact through chat box whenever I ask something, because I also want to know that if you already know something, I do not want to repeat and we can cover something extra. Secondly, the important part is that because the title is Indian Knowledge System, so some of you might think that we are going to have a great Gyan Vani in the morning, because it's the first session also. So people expect that all those Gyan Vanis are bombarded early in the morning, especially when it comes to Indian context and culture. Brahma Muhurat and till noon things are very auspicious and we do all these mental exercises. I'm going to keep it simple, because I am trying to focus on few points and few derivatives and the lessons that were learnt and we can learn further, or maybe we need to focus on as influencer, to use the current terminology, in our times for saving the environment and try to hold on the climate change. What is Indian approach towards the whole thing, and where we have failed or where we have made some mistakes, that we are not going to discuss, but we are going to discuss what are the lessons possible to learn. We are going to discuss the classics and the folk, and the deviation and the limits between the two we will discuss as soon as we move ahead in the lecture further. So let me begin by a very simple prayer that we all know. Let me first share my screen so we are sure that the PPT is visible. I think it is visible to all.
Yes ma'am, it is clearly visible.
Yeah. So what we do is we are going to discuss this. Just a second, I lost my screen. Yes. So let me begin with a very simple thing that we all know. One more footnote before I begin, that we don't have to take it as a religious study or a study in a particular religion, or because when we discuss Indian culture, many of us are under impression that we are talking about Hinduism and a Hindu lessons of the life, but we have to understand the texts and the references that we are going to have today are not religious, they are cultural, and we have to understand the terms in its proper meaning. Most of us know what is religion, what most of us know what is culture, but we think that they are synonymous. They are not. So let me begin with this simple note. The explanation of the two terms can take two more lectures, but in nutshell, religion is a some systematic structure of a particular ideology, where culture involves so many other things besides. It's almost a lifestyle, people's way of recreation, people's way of living, people's modes of coexistence. So all these are going to be part of culture. So we are going to discuss the civilizational lessons from the ancient Indian knowledge system, and how it is still visible directly or indirectly in our world. So let me first begin by this Shanti mantra, which we all know that most of the time, whether it is any auspicious occasion or whether it is any given occasion, we first invoke, especially in the Hindu rituals. The first mantra is the Shanti mantra, which goes like Om Dyom Shanti, Antariksha Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Rapa Shanti, Shanti Roshadaya Shanti, Vanaspataya Shanti, Vishve Deva Shanti, Brahma Shanti, and it goes on. So in nutshell, what happens is towards the end, we say it is like, dear God, dear Lord, give peace to the three worlds, give peace to the water, give peace to the space, give peace to the sky, give peace to the earth, give peace to the universe, fire, wind, flora, fauna, forests, deserts, entire universe, entire world, and ultimately everything that is even non-living in this universe needs to get peace, and please God bestow Shanti on us. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So with this mantra, what we are focusing here is that from the beginning of the civilizations that have been pagan, and many of you might be knowing what is paganism, but basically pagan cultures are the ones that worship the various forms and elements of nature. So we all know about Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and Aryan civilization. So I don't want to give background of those things, but just keep in mind that from the very beginning, this mantra is not for celebrating a practice that is a ritual, but just to refer to the fact that from the beginning, the morning or the dawn of our civilization, we believe in coexistence, we believe in harmony, and man has been praying for the peace of everything that is living and non-living in this
Are
entire
you sharing
universe.
something? Hello?
Yes?
Ma'am, are you sharing something? It is not visible, that's why.
Is it now visible?
Just screen
Yeah,
is visible, but nothing shared.
it is there visible. It is visible now.
Okay, okay. Actually, I may have a network issue.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Thank
yeah. So, can anyone tell me what are the civilizations that have associated or worshipped or have some kind of relationship with nature and the elements of nature? Can you quickly tell me the ancient civilizations that did it?
Inca civilization.
Yes, thank you. Then African civilization, maybe?
Egyptian.
Yes,
African.
because in Africa we have Egypt, and still today there are rituals and practices that have exist in African tribes that involve a lot of worship of plants, animals, etc. Egyptian civilization, we all know the Sphinx and the pyramids and how many things were cremated along with the pharaohs so that he gets the company of his flora and fauna in the other world as well.
There is Mayan Sanskriti also.
Mayan civilization is also there. Importantly, if we pay attention to the civilization in Africa, African civilization, Indian civilization, and Chinese civilization, which are still continuing the practices and which still exist, have shown a kind of a very intricate relationship with the nature and the various elements of nature. And as we would pay attention in the later stage, let me give you a spoiler alert that when we look at the civilization, we divide them as Western and Asian. Western versus Asian, Indian. So what happens is in the Asian civilization, especially in India, we see a kind of approach that says Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Now, when we talk about the whole world as one family, we are not just talking about the fact of human beings as family. All living things are considered as living and non-living things are which are created by God or whatever element you say, whether it is some physical activity or some Big Bang theory that led to the creation of the world. It can be anything, but whatever is created by the creator, if we want to use a safer word, is a family. And when we say it is a family, automatically we have few lessons, guiding principles that direct our lives. So our ancient text, that was, we have the, India, India celebrates two ways of learning. One is very oral and one is written, the classics and the oral. So even in the classics, they were originally oral because we had Shruti and Samhitas. So Shrutis, the Vedas, were first books of India, I mean the entire world. So the first book in the world, as we all know, is Rig Veda, and the remaining three Vedas. So Vedas suggest the following points. First is plant more trees, ban felling of trees, protect forests, purify environment, use solar energy, use electromagnetic waves, take special efforts to plant herbal and medicinal plants, keep balance between fire and coolness. So Agni and Samya Tattva should be balanced. Desist from polluting land and water. These are the guiding principles that are found in our Vedas. Now, these are some recurring concepts that happen. Now, again, going back to the idea of the world as a family, there is this reference of banyan tree, the Vata Vruksha, that is referred to as a symbol or a metaphor in Bhagavad Gita also. When in Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna talks about the metaphor of the world, how the world exists, he gives an idea of banyan tree, that the world is like a Vata Vruksh, and every creature, living or non-living, are part of its various branches. So some act as leaves, some act as branches, some act as trunk, and some act as roots. So if we see in totality, what the metaphor means is that our balance, our existence is dependent on the balance of other living and non-living creatures, and it talks about coexistence. Then we have lots of WhatsApp University messages that we generally get during monsoon and prior to monsoon and even during summer, that talk about the religious aspects and religious practices for various trees, and why should we plant various trees, and Vatavruksha and people, and you get all those essays. So I don't want to go into the details of how they are also relevant for the manufacturing oxygen and keeping which are the best trees and why they are worshipped. But banyan tree is a recurring concept in from Atharva Ved to Srimad Bhagavat to Ramayana until date. Even in the folklores, you talk about and hear about banyan tree. Similarly, these are the five concepts that recur in most of our classical texts, which talk about the environmental concerns that, or the environmental paradigms that they preached about in the ancient Indian systems. So first is Dashkupa Sama Vapi Dashvapi Samo Rada Dashrada Sama Putro Dashputra Samo Druma. That means a pond equals 10 wells and a reservoir equals 10 ponds. A sun equals 10 reservoirs and a tree equals 10 suns. This is said in Matsya Puran. Another example is from Yajurved, which says that you have to see all living beings as souls, and we don't have to carry an temptation or greed. Infatuation stands here for greed. Like if I see a chicken or a hen running around, I should not get tempted to have it as a food. Or say, for example, when we know Vishnu is worship black buck, we should not be tempted to leave our shooting places or shooting venues and go and hunt and feast on them. That is what infatuation means here. So we don't have to carry infatuation or anguish. Most of the times the leopard attacks in the Gir, or maybe the snakes, especially in the tribal areas, we feel scared and we feel very angry with those living beings. So that is also denied in Yajurveda. We have to learn to see the oneness in all the creatures and experience oneness with them. Now, some of you might feel that, ma'am, if we have feel oneness, but what if the snake doesn't feel oneness? So that is an instinct that we have to understand whether the snake is actually harmful to us or not. We need to get a training in that also. We should be getting these basic skills, understanding about the flora and fauna around us in our school system, which unfortunately does not happen. But Yajurveda talks about carrying a kind of empathetic view uh, about all the living beings. Isha Upanishad says that God, a similar concept is there in Isha Upanishad, which says God pervades in the entire universe. Enjoy all of nature as a gift from God, but with a spirit of renunciation. Ten tyaktena bhujita. That is the thing that we have been learning since school days. I think many of you would have Sanskrit in your school, and this lesson was there in at least my syllabus, so I know. And which so we have a limited sense of ten Tyakten Bhujita, where we understand it as a human relationship and human possession. But it talks about human relationship with nature as well as human relationship with the entire world, living and non-living beings. So do not get attached to them, do not covet others' wealth, control greed. Now, this last word we have to remember. Greed plays a very important role when why this entire issue of climate change and why this sudden concern about sustainability and why we are going back to know, or we are looking back and try to learn something where to find out where we have done damage to nature, because we could not control our greed and maybe we are still not able to control our greed. Yajurveda again asks to protect animals and not to kill them. Atharva Veda says that it is definitely a great sin to kill innocents. Do not kill cows, horses and people. Even the Buddhist texts talk about ecological devastation and natural resources when lust, greed, and wrong values grip the heart of humans. Another text of Buddhist Pali text says that a householder should accumulate wealth in a similar manner in which bee gathers nectar to turn sweet with honey without harming either the fragrance or the beauty of the flowers. This is such a beautiful concept where you take something from nature but without harming the creator of the that wealth and also enhancing the beauty. It means the human being is required to make appropriate use of nature so that the symbiotic relationship of man and nature is not hampered. Next is the text we all know, Mahabharata. I'm sorry I don't have translation for this in English. I could find only Hindi translation, but I can translate it for you. First slok says that the one who builds ponds or reservoirs, the one who plants trees, or one who performs yagna can go to Swarg. They are given priority and even importance in the uh, heaven. Besides this, the person who speaks truth can also get equal importance. The second shloka says that whosoever takes care of the above mentioned things and builds reservoirs or forest or parks or performs various yagnas and speaks truth, uh, learning from above, one must determine to do such rituals or such works during one's lifetime so that the otherworldly pleasures are granted to the person. Vrukshadam putravata vruksha tarayanti paratracha, which means the flowers and fruits, trees that bear fruits and flowers satisfy human beings. So the for the welfare and the benefit of the society, we have to, and for going to the other world also, we must plant trees. um, इसलिए श्रेयस यानी sorry, I translated in, I read out in the Hindi version, but I would translate it into English version for you. That the one who wants Shreyas. Now Shreyas is something which is more inclusive than just welfare and benefit. So I'm retaining the word Shreyas. The one who wants to uh, acquire welfare and benefit of this world and the other world must plant good trees around them, their habitation, and rear them as their own progeny. Um, in fact, according to the duty, trees are considered to be equal to the suns, or trees are the suns. Refer to the first slide where I said that one tree is equal to 10 suns according to Matsya Puran. That is getting indirectly referred to here in Mahabharata. Coming back to the other epic that we have learned from childhood and we rewatched it during lockdown last year. Many of you might be knowing the interesting tale behind the creation of this epic. What was the first shloka of this epic? If everyone knows, I don't have to repeat. But is there anyone who does not know? Then please tell me. Then I will tell the story in very short, quick manner. Everyone knows?
No, ma'am. Please tell.
Okay. Basically, this is going to be a combination of a lot of storytelling. So if you get bored by the stories, you can say, "Ma'am, now we are bored." So I will stop and start again referring to the references that I have taken. But Ramayana, interestingly, Valmiki, we all know that he was not a saint or hermit from the beginning. There was an incident that changed his entire life and the perception of the world, and then he went for this religious pursuit or spiritual pursuit through which he attained the position of this great rishi. And because of his tapa, his worship, his prayers, gods were very happy with him, and Narad Muni came to him and told him the entire story of Ramayana, the Sita Ram Vira, and how things happened and how Ram saved Sita and other people also from Ravan. This story was narrated to Valmiki much before he wrote Ramayana. Somehow he could not verbalize it. It was in his heart for years and years together. But one fine morning, like every day's practice, he went to the shores of Saryu to do his morning performance of the puja. So the time of sunrise he went there, and there was a couple of heron which was busy in love making. They were engaged in love making act, and suddenly a hunter was not seen, but suddenly hunter shoots the one of the pair, and the male cronch, the heron, was killed on the spot. And we know that the herons are the birds which live in couples. So if one dies, the other also dies. So what happens is that as soon as the he heron died, she heron was like devastated, and it kept banging its head till it died. Looking at this tragic event, Maharishi Valmiki's heart melted, and he was so angry with this Nishad, the hunter. He said, "The Mam Nishad Pratishtham Tvam Gama Shashwati Sama Yat Krocha Mithunadekam Avadhi Kam Mohitam," which means, dear O hunter, you would never get peace till Anantkal, till eternal time you will not get peace, because you have killed an innocent heron which was engaged in lovemaking act. So you will never get peace in your life. And this was the first shloka that led to the construction of or the writing of Ramayana epic. Now this is the event, even the event talks about the empathy that a human being has for the herons, and at the same time the cruelty that exists in the world. So when we talk about man versus nature relationship, there is always this contradictory approach. One is of control, that is of hunter who wants to kill this heron, and another is of empathy, which is of Valmiki, which sees the souls of heron as the souls created by God, as we saw in the first slide, in the five shlokas. He was able, because any human being, according to Indian knowledge system, who has attained spiritual knowledge, is able to see, perceive the uniting factor amongst living and non-living creations by the creator. So this first shlok itself stems from the environmental and ecological concerns of the Ramayana, which are found in every parva or every kand, with whatever you say in Ramayana. Interestingly, similar aspect was also seen, the cross currents of human nature in Mahabharata also, because I read out some of the references which talks about the foresting and planting trees and saving waters, etc., that are preached in Mahabharata from point to point. Even Vidur Niti also talks about how a king should take care of his kingdom and take care of its kingdom by balancing the use and production of natural elements. So it is there, but the other aspect of cruelty towards nature is found from Pandavas themselves, and it is a very debatable issue. Thank God none of you raised that question, but I expected that one of you might ask this question, that Mahabharata also talks and gives or probably exemplifies the act of deforestation when Arjun tries to clear Khandavprasth to make it their own capital, because they got Khandavprasth, which was almost a forest and uncultivable land. It was considered almost a jungle. It was a jungle, and what Arjun does is, because he wants to clear area to build his kingdom, rather their kingdom, he deforests the entire patch, and he also dislocates the Nagas, the people who lived in Khandavprasth. And this issue comes back towards the end of Mahabharata, when we have the battle of Kurukshetra, when Nagas joined Duryodhan not out of empathy or favor with Duryodhan, but because they want to take revenge against Pandavas, who dislocated them from their own motherland. And there are some dramas also written by our own Indian writers like Mahashweta Devi, which questions this act, and this has been questioned in many of folk literature also in Indian tradition. So you see the the dual aspects of human nature, especially taking place in Mahabharata and Ramayana. But Ramayana is more empathetic towards environmental concerns, and it tries to balance out and preach about the empathy that needs to be, a sense of discretion that human beings need to have towards the nature. So landscape and ecology from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka, sorry, Lanka, my mistake. When you watch too much of Family Man, Sri Lanka gets hangover in your mind. So I said Sri Lanka, but it is Lanka. So landscape right from Ayodhya to Lanka is given in a vivid, detailed manner, where you get to know the flora and fauna, geographical, topographical aspects of all these places. So you can go and pinpoint, okay, this is the place which Ramayana describes as Chitrakoot, this is Panchvati, this might be the place where Hanuman lived. So they are relatable and so vividly described. Hermitages in the forest show that how human beings, the rishis, lived in sync with forests, in sync with jungles, and we all know that there were two ashrams towards the end of human life according to Aryan civilization, wherein one is Vanprasthashram and the last one is Sannyasashram, in which people used to go to jungles and spend their rest of lives, and the jungles were also divided in four categories: Tapovan and Mahavan, and there are categories, and I will give you references if you want to get more details. There are papers written on it, how Indian civilization in past divided forest and how they were made use of. But Tapovans are the hermitages in which rishis dwelled and coexisted with the various kind and fierce aspects or animals of the forests. Birds and animals are shown as characters, which imply that we need human beings are in sync, they coexist with nature. So this pride of human being, that we are at the center stage of the world and the other things are created for our pleasure, is a big illusion. It satisfies our ego, but anthropogenic or anthropocentric approach towards life, where we see human beings as the center and the solo consumer of every other creation, is a mistake. If you pay attention to the facts and the story of Ramayana, we know that Ram gets lot of help through the birds like Jatayu, and he is also helped by this entire entire troop of monkeys and various other aspects of nature. Even when Sita is kidnapped, Ram and Lakshman begs to the gods of forest to tell them what happened to Sita, and the nature also shows how nature has changed after Sita is abducted by Ravan. So the entire story can be also read from this perspective as well. Now let us see some of the non-religious texts like Arthashastra, Manusmriti, Charak and Sushrut Samhita, and literary texts, the classical Sanskrit texts like Ritu Samhar, Abhigyan Shakuntalam, Meghdut. Even there are passages in Bhas, the dramatist Bhas, the dramas like Karnabharam, where he describes the fierce elements of nature and how it also help and affect human lives. So let us begin by the oldest text, and many of the people who are here, we all know that some of us might carry a grudge against Manusmriti, because we have this very trend of burning Manusmriti as if to defy the various divides that Manusmriti has created. But Manusmriti also has some underread or underplayed dicta of life that are still relevant, and which also show that Manu had also paid attention to the fact that if man has to live, he has to be very much aware of the pollution that he can create to the nature. And that is why he, in his dicta of prevention of pollution, says biodiversity means all living forms broadly ascribed as chara. Then there were achara, which were not movable, immovable. Pollution basically refers in Manusmriti to spoilage of 5 gross elements by unethical activity. Now, which are the 5 gross elements? Which we know as Panch Mahabhut: Prithvi, earth, wind, fire, sky, and water. These are the, so anything that gets any of this gets affected by our unethical. Now unethical is not just in terms of money. Unethical can be over exploitation, overuse also. Contamination refers to any action against wholesomeness. Storage organs of plants like various storage organs were not to be cut, and if they were not to be uh, uh, we should not even impart wounds or injury to various storage organs. You know, all you are science students, so you would have learnt it in school. So they should not be cut, and you know why they should not be cut. So Manu says that it should be a punishable offense. uh, it can also, he also describes punishments to the offenders. Importance was given for conserving and domesticating animals, biodiversity protection, and vegetation food habit. For biodiversity protection, he mentions that fishes of all type should not be killed for food purpose. One-hoofed animals, village. So he gives basically in detail what should be preserved, what should be consumed, but consumed with a discretion, which are completely protected animals and which should not be eaten. There is also a scientific aspect to it, that you know there are some animals which can be not suitable for our digestive system, so he denies that. Very interesting shloka which can be translated as, do not excrete into water, do not spit or throw dirty substances, blood or poison into water. Clearly this is intended for maintaining the water resources as pristine as possible. In spite of the difficulty imposed upon self, one must walk after seeing the path meticulously to protect the smaller creatures like ants, etc. This is what Manu said so many 100 years back, and we still throw excrete in the water. We spit, we not only throw dirty substances, but we also throw harmful chemicals, and even COVID virus infected and infested um, biomedical wastes into the water. And latest example of it being the dead bodies in Ganga, and the coronavirus found in the river samples of Sabarmati. So in nutshell, we learn and we know all about it, but ultimately we end up doing the same thing. In Arthashastra, Kautilya advises that there should be a difference between village and other areas. So basically, any village was should be surrounded by its green cover, which the planners say is the lungs of a region. If you talk to a regional planner or any planner who is an engineer and by training a planner, would tell you about the lungs that are required for any particular area. So Kautilya talked about it, and he said that a habitat when established should simultaneously exist with plants and water resources. Uh, to destroy the dam or reservoir specially kept for farming purpose was to be punished with the death of the offender. Now Kautilya takes a harsh stand against such offences, and he made some of the offences as unpardonable offences. So destroying the water resources was something which was completely unpardonable. Kautilya, sorry for the typo, Kautilya considered the cutting of trees as a physical torture to the plants, and he prescribed various levels of fines to be imposed on the offenders. He was equally aware of the importance of preserving the animal life. Uh, Giving pain to animals or causing death was also a severe offense. So there are two. Yes? Hello? Was somebody saying something? Okay, I continue. So these are two quotes that I have borrowed from Sen Gupta for your reference, which exemplify what we discussed in the first point. Now, Panchatantra. How can we forget Panchatantra and Hitopadesh, which encapsulates the lessons of living human life through the examples and the stories of animals and birds, right? And in there are so many examples, but this is simple and I borrowed it, which says that by cutting the trees and killing the animals, if someone aspires to go to the heaven, which is the way to hell, vakshaschitvam pasunhatva kitva rudira kurdam yadadev gamayate swargam narkam kena gamayate. So, which it in itself suggestive that when you kill animals or cut trees, it is not a path to heaven, but it is a path to health. Now, coming to the other half of our session, which emphasizes on the oral traditions in Indian knowledge system. And as I told you in the early slides also, that many of the early texts were Shruti, so they were not written in its original form. Somebody in later stage of civilization compiled them and documented them, and unfortunately we are so colonized in our mind that we feel that everything that is documented is the only knowledge. Otherwise, anything that is not documented is not knowledge. It is just something which is, very folk or pop. But actually, folk is a adapted version of keeping classical knowledge alive, classical traditions alive. Pop and folk are two different things, and we must not mistake one for the other. So, according to Professor Kapil Kapoor, Indian traditional knowledge has been constituted, stored, and maintained in the framework of oral culture. Professor Kapil Kapoor was, or rather, is a retired professor from JNU and who has done a tremendous work in Indian knowledge system. So, all those who are interested in knowing the gobbledygook world of Nyay, Puran, Samhita, Tark, and all those complex ideas, simplified or more complicated, should go to his work, and his lectures are also available on YouTube. Knowledge in this mode is simultaneous and not sequential or linear. This we have to understand, that it is not progressive. It might be progressive, but we cannot see it as a progress that is sequential or linear. And many of you, I believe almost all of you are from the background of computer learning, so you know that how non-linear or non-sequential can also be progressive. So I need not give you example or explain this, but knowledge system as oral culture has evolved over a time. It is simultaneous and non-sequential. In oral text and from Indian knowledge perspective, we have made 18 major vidyas, 18 major knowledge system or theoretical perceptions or gyan, which includes 4 Vedas, 4 subsidiaries Vedas, which consist of Ayurveda, Dhanurveda, Gandharva, and Shilpa. Then we have Puran, Nyay, Mimamsa, Dharmashastra, and Vedanga. Then we have phonetics, grammar, meter, astronomy, ritual, philology, which constitute of 6 auxiliary sciences. So in total, we have 18 ways of knowledge system or knowledge acquiring disciplines. The tradition of knowledge in India is, one is Shastra and another is Lok Parampara. So whatever we learn from Vedas or say the religious texts, they can all be classified as Shastra, where the adaptations in folklores and folk culture or our traditional cultural lives are called Lok Parampara. So for example, let me give you a simple example like Shilp Shastra. The Vastu Shastra is a Shastra. It is Shastra, but the traditional built or architectural way of living life, for example, the built forms like stepwells of Ran Ki Vav or the Baulis in Lucknow and Delhi, they are the Lok Parampara, which adapted to this architectural knowledge, architectural shastra, for the usage and continuation of water conservation in the parched or the dry areas like Gujarat, Rajasthan, and some of the areas of Delhi. So if you trace the roots, you would see that right from the upper part of Rajasthan till you go down to Girnar, Adikadi Vav, Navgand Kuo, all these stepwells are on the route of the pilgrimage or the migrations that used to happen during the ancient time, and this lands where there were no natural resources available in abundance. So the pilgrims or the migrants or the merchants who used to travel on this route were helped by this lok parampara of stepwells on the route. Another example of lok parampara in architecture or construction technology could be the Kathkhuni construction of Himachal, uh, especially the foothills in the Himalayas, or I'm forgetting the traditional name of the architectural form in Kerala, but Kerala built ancient traditional houses are built in a certain form, or maybe the chhajjas and the jarokhas or the carvings in layers in the houses in Rajasthan are an example of Shastra adapting to the climatic conditions of a particular region. So architecture says Shilpa Shastra would be, or Vastu Shastra would be talking about something. The principles are retained in Lok Parampara. So the chhajjas and chhatris are built, jazarukhas are built, and the layered carving help people in Rajasthan to save themselves and also allow a kind of ventilation in the dry arid regions of Rajasthan where it is very hot in summer. Even the houses of Ahmedabadni ports, the port houses are also examples of lok parampara or adaptation of shastras according to the climatic change, climatic adaptation in various regions. So these are some examples that we discussed. Now let us come back to the area of folk tales, and because I am from the world of literature, I love stories, and I think most of us love stories. So these are the stories that I have enlisted, and there are hundreds of such stories which are known and some of them are unknown to us. But I've tried to take them from various states across India. So Akupar is the story from Gujarat. Many of you would have, if you are Gujarati, some of you might have heard the novel by Dhruv Bhatt titled as Akupar. But what is Akupar? This story is from Gujarat, and many of us have visited, and many would be interested in visiting Sarsan and the Gir region of Gujarat, where the Asiatic lion is conserved and protected. The story talks about the local knowledge, the folk culture of that region, and it also entails the story, the folk tale about Akupar, the turtle, and how the various parts of nature that exist in Gir forest, how they coexist, and what are the norms and laws that we need to follow when we are in Gir. So let me tell you in brief the story if you are interested. You are interested? Are you interested in knowing about? Yeah. So Akupar is the name given to the turtle, and according to that part, that tribe, the hello. Okay, by mistake, I think the people who live there, they have their own sense of creation. Every region in the world, every tribe in the world have their own version of creation, and every version is so marvelous. Basically, every version tries to represent their sense of uh, a coexistence or their understanding and the perception of the world, various aspects of nature and their relationship with their nature. If you study any of their story or the version of their creation or origin, you would get an idea what a kind of relationship they share. So Akupar is a version of creation for these people who are called Maldaris, who keep their animals, the livestock with them, and they live with the lions around them. They are surrounded by lions, and they interesting fact about lion is that he or she, because we should be gender neutral, so it rather, lion never attacks when it is not hungry or when it is not challenged. It will sit quietly, and that is why we are taking disadvantage of its noble nature, and we are running jeeps and safaris all throughout the day and night, legally and illegally, and disturbing their own way of natural existence. That is another way of looking at it. But Maldaris have their own understanding and perception of creation. They believe that this turtle called Akupar is holding the earth in balance. It is sitting below the earth and maintaining the balance. And if we do not maintain the balance between human and nature, the balance of Akupar will be toppled and the earth will be toppled. So they are continuously paying attention to protection and conservation of environment. So it's not just Bishnois who protect black buck, but there are various parts in India who, people of which regions protect their various flora and fauna, because they believe that it is very important to keep them alive and protect them. Then only the natural balance will be maintained. So the other part of the story says that how this balance is acquired, because as soon as they started settling down in the uh, area of Girnar, the foothills of Girnar, and the mountains were created, land was created. So Maldaris have their livestock of cows and buffaloes. So they worshipped their regional goddess, Khodiar. They call it Khodiar. Now there is a debate whether it is the same Khodiar which is who is rather worshipped by other people of other regions in Gujarat, or they have other goddess, that, but it is their own goddess which they whom they worship. And they worshipped them, they invoked her, and they asked this question that if you are going to create such ferocious animal like lion, what would happen to us? We would not be able to survive. Obviously the lion will kill buffaloes and cows, and we will be left without any activity to sustain ourselves, because Gir as a forest is not very conducive to grow crops. We know that. And Gir is always almost 8 months of the year it is brown. So we know that it is a very different kind of a forest which is not green during the entire year. And that is why the lands are not so easily cultivable in terms of crops. So these people worshipped and prayed and asked for her uh, empathy or her blessings. And the mother goddess, because she is mother of men and other elements of nature, she is mother of lion also, she is mother of buffalo also, she is a mother of cow also, and she is a mother of men also. So she found out a way and struck a balance that divided the lines that they have to maintain, and they have to follow the rules that are uh, given in her condition. She made it a condition that of course lion would hunt cows, but lions would never hunt men unnecessarily, unprovoked, and it will never kill buffaloes. So if you want to protect your cows, you would always surround your cows by outer layer of a of buffaloes. And if you have buffaloes in the outer ring, the lions would never attack your cows. So even if you read about the incidents of lions attacking the livestock, it would always be cows. They never go to buffalo's shade, because this belief is exemplified by this act. Now we do not know if this is true or not, but it is a fact that lions don't kill unprovoked. Lions don't kill buffaloes, and they do kill cows if they get chance. So this is how the nature has maintained its balance through this story of the Maldaris. There is this another story of Nalanthagal. I don't know if I am wrong in the pronunciation, but it's a folk tale from Tamil Nadu, which talks about the lady Nalanthagal who sacrificed her 7 children during the time of famine. The story is also interpreted as a story of Sita, who was left by Ram, and because of her pathetic condition that she was forced to live in, famine struck the land, and because it was a famine, she from northeast part of India, because they live continuously in and amongst nature. They have their own ways of understanding and interpreting their existence and the existence of the natural elements surrounded by them. So there is this story of Raja Mircha. One more story, right? We can take two more stories. Yes? Game for it?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
ma'am.
Okay. So Raja Mircha is a story from Nagaland. It's a folk tale from Nagaland, which says once upon a time there was a man by the name of Panmei. Now who was hunting for food in deep jungles, and he came across this king chili today, which is known as Raja Mircha in the local language, and he mistook this chili, big chili, as a fruit because it's very luscious and very uh, deep red in its appearance. So he mistook it as a fruit, and he, out of hunger, ate it. Now, immediately after eating it, he was in terrible burning from pungency of the mircha, and he started rolling and crawling in the jungle, and he did not know what to do. He ran out of breath, and he was in a very pathetic condition, and he was about to faint. And suddenly what happened, that a bird, roingo, now I do not know the exact English word of roingo. I tried to Google search, but it doesn't give an exact answer, so you have to assume that it's a bird found in Nagaland. And pay attention, Nagaland is the land where even dogs are eaten. So this is a story of this bird, uh, roingu, who flew over this man carrying a bunch of paddy, and it dropped the paddy on the stomach of the Penmei. The name Penmei. Uh, Penmei is symbolic of the tribe Penmei or the cluster Penmei also. So he was lying almost about to faint in this jungle, and this roingo comes and drops a paddy on his stomach, and suddenly he took the paddy and extracted few grains and started munching on it raw itself. In a matter of seconds, the burning pain in his mouth and stomach vanished. Panmei believed this to be a miracle sent by God. He carefully collected the bunch of remaining paddy and chili plant and took possession of it. And what began next was that he started farming King Mircha, the Raja Chili, Raja Mircha, and he also started growing paddy in Nagaland. Later on, the clan Gena, that is also known as Zelin tribe in Nagaland, they have a continuous forbidding of killing this bird called Rohingya, because it was the bird that helped their first men in the jungle, and it also brought this wealth of paddy and king chili to the tribe, which helped them become independent in terms of food and becoming economically more wealthy, or rather wealthier. This folk tales is about Zelian tribe from Nagaland, and this bird is prohibited till date. This tribe does not kill Rohingya bird in the, even if it is found sitting on the tree. Otherwise, even flying birds are killed in Nagaland, because we all know the harsh conditions there and the scarcity of the food. So for them, paddy was the first blessing. They started depending on the agriculture on this, due according to this story. The another story of old lady and her iguana is from Tripura, which also talks about how nature takes care of the people who take care of her, and how nature can revenge if you become cruel to her. So this story in nutshell talks about a very old poor lady, very poor lady, who used to live on a hill in Tripura and in the outer skirt of a small village. Now the ritual of this lady was that she would beg in the village during the day, and by evening she would come with some rice and some food, which she would offer to the iguana that lived near her hill. So that was a ritual, and for years it was going on, and that is why she was in habit that if she doesn't feed iguana, she would not eat herself. So one day there was a marriage in the village and everybody was invited. The old lady was also invited and she was to go there, but she was looking forward to go there because there would be a lot of food and there would be a lot of activities that she had never seen. But on the other hand, she was also worried that she did not have appropriate clothes to go there and participate there. So she spent the entire day sitting there in her porch without going to beg food. And by evening, she realized that she has not cooked for herself nor fed iguana. So she came out. Iguana had in fact come out for its lunchtime. Whenever she was offering the food, at that time it came out, but the old lady was so lost in her thoughts that she did not notice it, and iguana went inside. So it remained hungry. Old lady brought out whatever little was left in his house, in her house, sorry, and she offered it, but iguana by then had gone inside the uh, its uh, habitat. So what happened was that she remained hungry because she felt so bad about it that she could not feed iguana on time, and she went to sleep in her thoughts about iguana. On the other hand, the family that had marriage wanted to do something extraordinary. We all have this, passion of doing something extraordinary when we have functions in the house. So everybody wants to make it very different. કંઈક નવું કરીએ, something different, कुछ नया करते हैं, kind of. आज कुछ तूफानी करते वाले मूड में सब आ जाते हैं. So people come in this mood, and the young boys in the family decided to feast upon something on which they have not feasted for years. And somebody came up with this idea that let's eat iguana, because we have not eaten it for years together, because iguana is not easily found and very difficult to hunt also. So one boy said that if you allow me my part of iguana, then I would show you where iguana lives. And he takes the entire group to the hill where old lady lives, where the iguana also lives, and they poke sharp things inside her house, I mean iguana's residence, and force it to come out. And as soon as it comes out, they chop off and they kill and they feast on it. On the other side, the old lady is still feeling very guilty, and suddenly she feels lot of uneasiness. She goes out, but iguana is not seen, but she is not aware of the fact that iguana is dead. After an hour or so, suddenly she is woken up by one sound which says that run away, run away. So she doesn't pay attention to the first alarm. In the second time, it's louder and very firm and very strong, and it says, dear old lady, run away, because you do not know I am the spirit of iguana that lived near your house. I am dead now, and I am decided firm to take revenge against these people who killed me for no purpose, just for fun, and they are going to pay price for it. This entire village is going to get submerged. I'm going to curse them, so you better run away. So old lady got up, she shook her head, she could not understand. The voice came one more time and almost pushed her out of her house, and she ran away. She ran away. Early in the morning, she reached a nearby village and fainted there, and she told this story when she came in consciousness. So the villagers of the nearby village decided to go back to her village, and what they show was the entire village was submerged in water, and only the point of the house of this old lady was visible. So there was a pond in place of this old lady's house. So the lesson that is there is self-explanatory. I don't want to go into the details. You all are smart enough to understand this lesson. Now let me read out one or two interesting aspects of this divide that exists in nature, and how beautifully they are captured in the folktale of Bono Baby or Bun Baby, which is a tale in the much discussed and controversial Chobis Parganas of West Bengal. And it is a story which talks about how balance is a must thing in Sundarbans, because Sundarbans is also infested with tigers and dolphins. Gangetic dolphins are only, I mean, they are now decreasing because of the global warming and the rising water levels. They are also offshoring itself, and if you Google search, you would come to know about this species called Gangetic dolphins and how they are endangered now, and what is happening in Sundarbans right now. UNESCO has declared it as a World Heritage Site, and then we realize the importance of Sundarbans. Till then, we do not pay attention to the lessons given in Bon Bibi's tale. Bon Bibi is a tale again, which is a folk tale that talks about Hindu-Muslim unity. Because in this tradition, folk tales, you would pay attention. If you pay attention, you would find that there is no religion. In fact, many characters of various religions, they come together and they are celebrated together. And Born Baby's folktale is my favorite. Uh, uh, Let me show you the title of a book that has come out. An author called Amitav Ghosh has documented this story in the title called Jungle Nama. It's a beautiful tale which is translated into English. Those who know Bangla would know the story perhaps, or maybe would be delighted to read it in its origin, because it includes many languages, not only Bangla, but it borrows from Urdu, it borrows from English also sometimes, because it's a folk tale which has been handed over from generation to generation. So this is the story, which begins as, many great rivers rise in Himalaya, the Ganga among them and the Brahmaputra. Flowing down from west and east, they meet in Bengal and branch into numberless streams, some vast, some small. Still they multiply, courses splitting as they flow, creating a tangled green archipelago. Thousands of islands rise from the river's rich stills. crowned with forests of mangrove rising on the stilts. This is the Sundarban, where leaden waters give birth to a vast jungle that joins ocean and earth. Sundarban is a very different kind of a place. It's a different landscape, waterscape all put together. And I would insist that you please search it online and you would come to know about this amazing place that is hidden and endangered. Um, so this basically the folktales. This folktale describes Sundarban. I have stopped sharing it. Let me go back to the screen. I think it's visible now. So
Yes, yes, it is.
so this thus begins the depiction of Sundarban, how it is created, how is it, where it is located, and what includes in Sundarban is like that. Leaden waters give birth to vast jungle, which is a which joins ocean and the earth. Then begins the story of Bon Bibi and Dokhin Rai. Now, Dokhin Rai is an evil spirit that takes a form of tiger, interestingly, and the Sundarbans used to be his territory. So the story begins by saying this realm was once under the sway of Dokhin Rai, a mighty spirit feared by all under the sky. He preyed on humans in a tiger avatar. Whomever he wanted, he would take for his shikar. Under his rule, all beings shivered in terror. Day after day, they looked heavenwards in prayer. At length, their entreaties crossed the empty quarters. From Arabi, there came two beings of great power. Now, the origin of Ban Bibi is from Arabia. She comes as from Arabia. Two powers came from Arabic world. One was mistress of the forest, Bon Bibi. The other was her brother Shah Jongli. Bon Bibi was strong but full of compassion. Her brother was a warrior. His powers were legion. The stranger's arrival didn't elude Dokkan Rai. Nothing in his realm escaped his unblinking eye. And the story begins because the area is devoted completely. It was Dokkan Rai's, Sundarban was the realm of Dokkan Rai, who was an evil spirit, and Bon Bibi with her brother comes as a rescuer. So she is a benevolent spirit which is invoked when one is lost in Sundarbans. The entire story talks about how a person called Dukhe was taken by one merchant into these territories, and how Dukhe Rai uh, came in the form of tiger and asked for one sacrifice from the merchant because they had entered the territory was agreed upon to be his territory. And the beginning of the story tells after Bon Bibi and Shah Jongli came, they have fierce war with this Dokhin Rai, who was invincible till then. And Bon Bibi, along with her brother Shah Jongli, again a Muslim character, they defeat Dokhin Rai, but because it's also a spirit, he is given his territory, and it is agreed upon that they would Dokhin Rai would rule this territory, which was granted to him, and any human being who would cross and enter this territory, Dokhin Rai would be free to prey upon him. Now, the interesting twist in the tale is that if a person, even if caught by Dokhin Rai, in time invokes Bon Bibi and asks for her blessings, he or she gets rescued by this brother and sister. So, uh, after this fierce fight amongst these two, what happened was what they wanted to end was his tyranny. They did not want to control or take over Sundarbans from Dokhin Rai, but wanted to defeat his tyranny. This they did by confirming him to a boundary. They drew a line to mark just separation between the forest and the realm of the human. To Dokhin Rai was given the jungles of the south, where land and water mingle at the river's mouth. No human would come there, nor could he go inside or outside. He would live a life of plenty, reigning with pride. So Dakin Rai would also live a life of plentiful, and in his pride would be maintained. So the elements, fierce elements of the nature also have their own way of cycle, ecological system, and have place in ecology. So they must be allowed their space. This is the gist of this fight and the granting of territory to a tyrant. Thus did Bon Bibi create a dispensation that brought peace to the beings of Sundarbans. Every creature had a place, every want was met, all needs were balanced like the lines of couplet. So, the story says that since the tyranny was ended and the territories were divided, it was hoped and believed that the people, the Sundarban would be protected and men would be protected from the tigers of the Sundarbans. But unfortunately, if you Google, you would come to know that there is this man versus tiger thing happening in Sundarbans and the areas of Sundarbans. As we are facing the encroachment, we feel it is an encroachment, forgetting the fact that it is their homes which we have encroached, and that is why they are coming to our homes. With that, we conclude the session by remembering something put up by Rabindranath Tagore and connecting our entire discussion today, that talk begin with rather the ability to perceive oneness amongst all living and non-living things in nature and in the universe. So Rabindranath Tagore in his Religion of Forest says that there can be two attitudes towards life and nature, one that attempts to guide and that also attempts to guide our relationship with the universe. It can be an attitude of conquest or by union. An Indian knowledge system follows the way of relation or understanding of life that perceives life as a union with other elements of natural element, either through the cultivation of power or through that of sympathy. So if you look at the Western civilization, the attitude towards or the relationship with men men with nature is of power and control. So you have everything, because the nature is so harsh there also, there is this approach of power and consumption, whereas in Indian knowledge system it is of sympathy and of union. So, and thus in our realization of truth of existence, we put our emphasis either upon the principle of dualism or upon the principle of unity. Dualism is the one where man sees nature as its enemy, his enemy. So you have to control the heat, you have to control, you have to be on guard against nature and continuously try to capture it. So it is dualism where we feel that I am different from them. So I am superior to the fellow creatures. So whether it is cow, whether it is hen, whether it is pigs, whether it is anything, everything is made either for my consumption or for my pleasure. So I make lions run around in Gir forest because it gives me pleasure, forgetting that the principle of unity, that there is a soul that also resides in it, and we must follow the principles of sympathy and unity that is practiced and preached by our great living culture. With this, I end. If you have any questions, we can take them and we can discuss anything that you want to discuss further. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Dear participants, if you are having any queries, question or any discussion, let us continue for a few minutes.
Any observation or any feedback that you would like to make is also very welcome.
It was a wonderful session, madam. You have given a lot of insights into Indian knowledge system. I got some good insights into this.
Thank you, sir. I'm also learning. I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm a big scholar, but I'm also learning. And
But
these
yeah,
are the things that fascinate me because, you know, there is a lot of discussion about Indian tradition and living tradition, and we know it, but we do a cut paste kind of approach is there. We don't try to see the elements that unite all this.
okay. Actually, you have enlightened us with what is the knowledge we required today to work with our environment and ecology and sustainability. Okay, you have taken the glimpses from all the epics as well as all the books, so which are all our ancient references like Manusmriti, even Arthasastra, Kautilya Arthasastra. It was a wonderful this one you have given. I can say I am very much thankful to you personally for
Thank you,
enlightening
sir.
us with
Thank you
this
for the
knowledge.
kind words.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Anyone else from the participants?
Namaste, ma'am.
Namaste.
I have also similar feeling like Satish has told. Very good session taken by you. We have gone through some our spiritual knowledge system. Thank you very much.
I'm glad. I'm glad.
I wanted to add one more thing. So, like this folk tales and other things, no, in our south, especially in Andhra, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, we
Yeah.
used to have the books called Chandamama.
Yeah.
Chandamama was a book. So, it carries a lot of stories, like it is similar to, even though there's fictions, there are a
Yeah.
lot of folk stories also that
Yeah.
carries information like this. But we have already lost, it's already 60 years old. This
Yes.
one, that book was closed. So we were very much disappointed about this closure of that book. So I wanted to add this to you, everybody. If we
Yeah,
have
sir.
got archives of the Chandamama, there's a website also, chandamama.com. Anybody is interested, they can see in almost all the languages it is there. Okay, thank you.
I think, sir, we used to read some of the old versions because we didn't have the original ones
Yeah,
when we were kids of Chanda Mama, and equally disappointed we were when we used a vernacular or a Gujarati version of Chanda Mama, which was called Champak. We
yeah,
used
yeah.
to get Champak and Fulwadi and Niranjan. Again, Fulwadi and Niranjan had lot of stories from, I mean, the day-to-day kind of run-of-the-mill stories. But Champak was, like as you said, it was full of learnings, and the characters were animals and birds. So thank you for reminding it.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and we should look. I should have included that also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello,
Yes.
madam. Can you provide websites and references for detail on Indian knowledge system, madam?
Yes, there is one Indian Knowledge System Center for Indian Knowledge System in Bangalore,
Yes.
which does a lot of work combining modern technology and Indian culture, traditional Indian culture. There are so many other. I would probably try to uh, list them down and share it with Manisha madam or the
Sure,
team here,
madam.
and
Yes, yes.
probably they would be sharing with you in your mailbox or the way they would be able to do it.
Yes, madam. Yes, yes.
I would surely send it across.
Okay. Otherwise, it was very fruitful session, madam.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm glad. I'm really glad.
Thank you, madam.
We are in 5 more minutes, so any participants would like to say something or discuss or any queries?
If no one has, I have one question to ask, because
Yes.
I'm an activist in terms of environment and sustainability and all, and I like we do read and do stuff about this climate change in literature also. So what is it that I know? I mean, there are so many things happening in terms of alternative energy and sustainability, in terms of technology and engineering. But what you as an individual feel that can be contributed for the, if not reversal, at least limiting the negative effects of this unthoughtful, uh, un under-evaluated kind of progress that we are discussing in the world today. The consumerist, materialistic kind of an approach that is there. So you know what? Sometimes we feel that we drive the dog from one door and it comes back from the back door. That is what is happening. So like if you are switching off offline education to online, we are consuming electricity instead of using fuel. So what as an individual, one or two from you might give me the answer of this, because I am really interested in creating such dialogues.
So one thing I can say that we have to inculcate that universal human values.
Yes.
That is very important in this scenario. That means it brings the harmony among everything.
True.
Yeah, that is what
And as
from.
teachers, I believe all of you are teachers, and as teachers, we can always do that part in our capacity. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Since last 2 days we are having technical sessions one by one, and 3 more days we are having technical sessions. So in between those technical sessions, we got your session, and this session was really beautiful and refreshing, because the concept you cover, it was just like a school concept we learn and we forget actually. So you just refresh all this concept, all those ethical values about the environment. We promise you, ma'am, that we will from now and onward we will try to protect environment, water resources, and every lives, animal, plants, and every necessary creature of nature. We will protect that. So, ma'am, thank you once again for such a beautiful, such a worth attending session. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I am happy and glad and really humbled by your invitation and this entire session, because by teaching we learn. That is what we say, and by speaking also and discussing we learn. So I think I also learned a lot from today's session, and I am happy that I was in halftime kind of a situation. So good luck to all of you for the remaining technical session, and I'm very sure that you all are going to learn a lot of things in this FTP, and hope to see you all somewhere sometime in future. Thank you.
Okay, yes, sure, ma'am. Thank you very much. Thank you all the participants. We will resume our next session at 12:30, right? Thank
Shall
you,
I leave?
thank you all.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. You may leave. You may leave.
Thank you, the team.